Welcome to StackTrekker. In this tutorial, we're going to learn what JSON is, why it's so widely used, and how to work with it. By the end of these 10 minutes, you'll be able to read, write, and understand JSON like a pro. Let's get started. First, what exactly is JSON? JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's a lightweight format used for storing and exchanging data. It's easy for humans to read and write, and just as easy for machines to parse and generate. Let's take a moment to highlight 5 key benefits of using JSON. First, JSON is easy to read and write. Its syntax is simple and clean, making it friendly for both humans and machines. Second, JSON is lightweight. It uses fewer characters than formats like XML, which means faster transmission over networks, especially important for APIs and mobile apps. Third, JSON is language independent. Even though it's based on JavaScript, it works with nearly every modern programming language, including Python, Java, C#, PHP, and more. Fourth, JSON supports complex data structures. You can nest objects and arrays as deeply as needed, which makes it flexible and powerful for representing real-world data. And fifth, JSON is the standard for modern web development. From REST APIs to NoSQL databases and front-end frameworks, JSON is everywhere, making it essential knowledge for any developer. Now let's look at some examples and break them down. So let's create a simple JSON file. For example, we want to describe a person, someone named Alice. We'll start by adding curly braces to define our object. A JSON object always begins and ends with curly braces. They define the boundaries of the object. Inside those braces, we define key value pairs. Each pair represents one piece of information about the object. Let's add our first key. We'll call it name. Keys should always be unique within the same level of the object. In other words, no two key value pairs at the same level should share the same key. This is important because any program reading the JSON needs to match each key to exactly one value. Now remember, every key in JSON must be a string, and it must be wrapped in double quotes. After the key, we add a colon. This separates the key from the value. Then we add the value, in this case, Alice. Since it's a string, it also needs to be wrapped in double quotes. And just like that, we've created a simple JSON object with one key value pair, the name Alice. Now let's add another parameter, the age. Since it's a new key value pair, we need to separate it from the previous one with a comma. Commas are important in JSON when you're listing multiple properties within the same object. This time, the value is a number, so we don't need to wrap it in quotes. JSON supports numeric values just like most programming languages. They're written as is without quotation marks. So now we have two key value pairs, name and age. Once again, because we're adding yet another property, we place a comma after the age pair. Finally, let's add a third key called isDeveloper. This is a Boolean value, which means it can only be either true or false. In our case, Alice is a developer, so we'll assign the value true. And since this is the last key value pair, we don't add a comma after it. That's a common mistake. Adding a comma after the final item will actually make the JSON invalid. So now, we have a complete and valid JSON object describing Alice with 3 properties, her name, her age, and whether or not she's a developer. Nice work, you've just created and understood your first well-structured JSON object. Until now, we've only used single values in JSON, like name, age, or a Boolean. But what if we want to provide more than one value for the same key? That's where arrays come in. JSON supports arrays, which are used to store multiple values under a single key. For example, let's say Alice has a few favorite programming languages. We can represent that using a key like languages and assign it an array of values. Arrays in JSON are written inside square brackets. Since we're listing strings, each value inside the array needs to be in double quotes, and each item is separated by a comma. Arrays can hold different types of data: strings, numbers, booleans, even other objects. You can also nest arrays inside arrays if needed. It's a flexible way to represent lists of data in your JSON structure. Now let's say we want to include Alice's address. In this case, we can nest another object inside our JSON. This is called a nested object. Just like before, we provide a key, let's say address, but this time the value will be another JSON object. In other words, it's JSON inside JSON. Here, we provide Alice's street, city, and zip code. There's no strict limitation on how deeply you can nest objects in JSON. It all depends on the needs of your program or data structure. Just make sure it's still readable and manageable. Let's add something interesting. Alice's projects. Each one will include a name, the programming language used, and its status. Since she can have more than one, we'll use an array of objects. We'll create a new key called projects. Its value will be an array, and inside that array we'll add multiple entries, one for each project. Let's add the first and then a second. Notice how both entries use the same keys, name, language, and status. That's perfectly fine because each item in the array is separate and independent. As we discussed earlier, keys must be unique at the same level, and here each entry exists in its own scope within the array. Now let's look at how JSON is used when working with real APIs. I'll use a program called Postman, which is a powerful tool for testing and interacting with APIs. If you're not familiar with it, I have a separate tutorial on my YouTube channel where I explain Postman in more detail. In this example, we'll be using a free test API. You'll see the link on your screen, and I've also added it in the description below. Let's start by fetching a list of products. In Postman, create a new GET request and enter this URL. Then hit send. You'll receive a response in JSON format, showing a list of products. Each product includes structured data like title, price, rating, and more. This is exactly how the frontend gets product data from the backend in a real-world application. Now let's see how to send JSON to the server. Again, we'll use our free API server. For example, let's create a new user. Change the request method to post and use this URL. Go to the Body tab, select Raw, and choose JSON from the Format dropdown. Then provide the body JSON. Click Send, and you'll see a response confirming that the user was added. Again, all in JSON format. This is how data is typically sent to APIs in real-world apps, as structured JSON in the body of a request. Now let's take a quick look at how JSON works in JavaScript. This is not a full JavaScript tutorial. I just want to show you how simple it is to use JSON in your code. So first, we create a constant called user. It's a regular JavaScript object with some simple data, like the user's name, age, and whether they're a developer or not. Now to send this data somewhere, like to an API, we need to convert it into a JSON string. For that, we use the stringify function. This will output a string version of our object. And this is exactly the format that APIs expect when you're sending data in a request. Next, let's imagine we got that JSON string back from an API response. To turn it back into a usable object, we use the parse method. Now we can work with the data again like a normal JavaScript object. In this case, we're just logging the name to the console and we get Alice as expected. So as you can see, using JSON in JavaScript is super simple, and this is something you'll do all the time when working with real-world APIs. So to wrap things up, here's what we learned today. We started with the basics, what JSON is and why it's so widely used in modern development. Then we looked at the structure and syntax of JSON, including how to write valid JSON using key value pairs, arrays, and nested objects. Finally, we explored real-world usage, making API requests in Postman, sending and receiving JSON, and working with JSON in JavaScript. That's it. You now have a solid understanding of how JSON works and how it's used in real projects. So I hope this was interesting. Thank you for watching my tutorials. If you enjoyed this, please like the video and subscribe. See you later. Bye.